it's all good, and I'm noticing things about my communication. Some of the videos I'm a little bit more humorous, some of them flow a lot better, some of them I talk for a lot longer without a break between what I'm talking about, which could be a blip in the video, or a blip in the video could be because I coughed or said the words really wrong. And I could just keep going, but I decided that I would stop and then say the word over so then I could come back later and edit it. So I've gone through and I've done a lot of editing and done a lot of editing, and I think I'm ready for the next iteration of whatever it is that I want to say. And I was even thinking that maybe at some point I won't even feel like I need to talk about this anymore, because at least I've said it into videos, I've made it into videos, and I could just kind of move on. I could just drop it, and whether or not I ever release the videos to the public or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is just that I got to say it. I got to not just think it, but say it out loud, and then revisit it and watch it. And I almost came up with, oh, I did it again. I almost came up with a lot more insights based on just listening to what I was saying. So while I was talking, I had ideas of what I wanted to say, but when I was expanding on those ideas, I came up with new ideas. And then watching myself speak, I actually came up with ideas beyond some of the ideas that I said, or new ways to tie them together. So it was like the next integration, the next evolution. And it almost feels like now I've entered into this space where I'm just constantly learning from myself, from that other communication that comes through. And it almost feels like maybe I never need to read another book again. And some of the stuff that I speak about has a background in some of the stuff that I've read, and some of it doesn't. But it almost, some of it, the book stuff is actually confirmed by my experience. So then I refer to the book stuff because of that. Because basically, and that's another thing I say a lot, is basically, because I need more words for basically, but, and also I can say maybe, because maybe those people have done sort of the science, and I have this experience, and I read those books, and then I had this experience, and now I'm relating my experience back to the books and what the books were saying. So maybe the books and things I read primed the experience. But it's just interesting after like doing all this reading and then having these experiences and being in retrospect being able to be like, wow, that really resonates with all the things I read. Yet my experience by society is interpreted as a mental illness, and I don't really see it that way, as you know if you've watched some of my videos. But it's okay to also include that. I do feel like it is partly true, say like 1 or 2% true, in that, and it could be more percent true because that's the truth that people behold within their relational minds about that concept or supposed fact. People see it as a mental illness, and that's why, to me, through these conversations and dialogues with myself, just getting that energy in motion into sound, words, thoughts, new memes. It could actually perhaps help to change the relational mind or change the way we relate and talk about these experiences. And I have no idea if that's true, but I don't know what the alternative is. The alternative seems to be something really slow. There's a lot of great people doing a lot of great work out there, and I don't know of anyone who just starts talking with themselves into a camera about it and posting it, and I don't know if I will post it. The reason I'm saying this is because I feel like these perspectives might resonate with a lot of people, and maybe I'll share 1,000 different perspectives or 1,000 different ways of thinking about it. And it's not about saying that these 1,000 ways are right. Maybe they're all wrong. The point is that I am thinking about it differently. I'm thinking for myself about it. I'm looking at it and I'm analyzing it, but not as a person that has all these facts that I've been told about it and then thinking about myself in terms of that. I'm actually, oh, there's a spider on the wall. I'm actually thinking for myself about it and looking at it from different perspectives and vantage points and comparing it to things and making metaphors out of it, making meaning out of it, having insights about it instead of just thinking about it in terms of the stigma story. And so what I'm trying to say is some of that might resonate, or it might just resonate that, oh, there's a different way to think about it, or I can think about it however I want. It's my inner subjective experience. Just as I could interpret a dream 1,000 different ways, I can interpret altered states. That was a mistake. Altered states of consciousness in any way that I find meaningful in the moment, and it can change over time, and I can think about it X way today and Z way tomorrow, and I can forget that I ever thought about it X way, and might, if I don't write it down and look at it again, I might never remember that I thought about it that way. But it was just an interesting way to think about it, and there's so many different possible ways of thinking about it. Instead of thinking about it the one way that we're told to think about it, why not think about it in as many ways as possible? If anything else, just for fun, just to entertain oneself about one's own consciousness and experience. And in my mind, it's actually better to not hold onto any of those interpretations as facts. They're just thoughts about the experience of thoughts and abstractions that one had in an altered state of consciousness. So none of it is really true. It's all words about words. And to me, it's partly like making up my own philosophy of altered states of consciousness from my own experience and relating it to stuff that I've learned about. And when I do this, relating it to certain things I've read in books, I cannot guarantee the accuracy. I'm just going off the top of my head. So if something sounds interesting that I talk about, that was something that somebody else discovered, please don't quote me on it. I can find the reference if you would like, if you want to ask me. And when you read it and you look it up, it might not be exactly as I have outlined it. And that's not the point. The point is just that there was a certain person that had a certain thought or discovery that related to what I experienced. And when I share in the moment about it, it may or may not come out exactly right. And that's the point. This talking isn't about being perfectly correct about stuff. It's just about talking. It's just about having conversation, just like I might have conversation with a stranger on the street, not about facts. Facts are like going out and looking and then seeing that somebody else said it's okay to think this, it's a fact, and then putting it in my brain and memorizing it, so then when the time comes I can regurgitate it and sound smart, or be sure that I'm right, or win the conversation. And this isn't about that. This is about just having conversation. This is about making conversation. This is about making meaning. It's not about right and wrong. It's not about facts. We rely so much on professionals to give us the facts that we forget how to actually think for ourselves. And if we are just regurgitating facts or what we think are facts, we're actually not thinking at all. We're not using our brains. We're actually just robotic machines who have just memorized certain things, and those things come out when prompted as associations in a reflex. So our thoughts become reflexes, and in that way we're just programmed and conditioned robots. So by remembering so many facts and studying and memorizing them, we're actually making ourselves quite mechanical. And when you think about it, a person that specializes in something and becomes a professional becomes very full of all of that knowledge, so they can just be this quick reflex with that knowledge. And that's important in various fields for sure. But if we in our daily life just use professional facts or things we heard on the news in order to make conversation, we're actually just being a reflex of memories which we heard, which are secondhand, which means we're not actually coming up with anything ourselves. Zero. And we're actually trained to not come up with stuff ourselves just through our education by learning things and then putting our hand up to have the right answer. Well, to me, some of these altered states of consciousness that I've experienced, it's almost like there's so many more thoughts that come up and associations that are new, and the range and the depth and the breadth of the associations and thoughts it's huge. So I have all these new thoughts, and some of them seem right and some of them seem wrong, and some of them seem weird, and some of them are making associations to things in the past. What I've realized was this is almost like a state where the universe is brainstorming through us. There's the process of brainstorming where people just sit down and just say every idea without filtering. So it's almost like the universe turns us into a brainstorm, and through our daily existence in, say, a state of mania, everything we see has all these thoughts, perceptions, associations, and there's way more of them. There's 100 or 1,000 times more. And in that way, it's almost like we're brainstorming, and there's no filter. There's no filter, which is the filter that is what we've chosen to memorize and store in our memory banks and almost have it in there, taking up all the RAM or random access memory, so we can't randomly access any other source of thoughts or thinking that might be actually based on perceiving the environment around us. So in my thoughts, in the process of, say, mania, that filter turns off and the universe is actually brainstorming through us. So instead of us through our linear process going and picking and choosing what we're going to store in our brains, the universe says, hey, I'm going to show you all of this. And to go with that, it almost feels like the brain is trying to grow again. They talk about how at a certain point in child development, the brain goes through a pruning process. So certain neural pathways and neurons get pruned off, and a good chunk of neurons actually get pruned. And I'm wondering actually if sort of society, the way the society is actually designed, is what prunes the neurons. So the neurons get pruned to match society. Now, if we had a different society full of more degrees of freedom and possibilities of what is agreed to be allowable experiences and perceptions and states of consciousness, maybe those neurons wouldn't get pruned. And what I'm thinking too is that this mania process is like a second brain growth. It's an attempt to almost regrow those neurons through all these thoughts and associations and hyper energy. And then there's no discernment. It's almost like being an adult child, and we don't have that discernment. And we go back to the place where we're actually testing things in reality that are rules that we actually probably had the programming for, but that programming gets deleted, and then we're again testing reality and trying to find out how it works, figuring out how gravity works, figuring out so many different things just as a child would. And then I feel like that state only lasts so long, and then again there's a pruning process. So maybe the pruning happens in the whole process of a person being sort of recaptured and medicated back into society. Maybe if somebody wasn't recaptured, their brain would just keep growing. And I'm just making this up. I don't know if the brain is actually attempting to grow, but it just makes me feel like all this energy comes up through the brain and the body, all these thoughts and associations. And thoughts and associations actually, it's part of the whole neuroplasticity process. So it could be trying to create neuroplastic changes in the brain through this mania. And if there was neuroplastic changes in the brain, a person's behavior and perception would be altered. And if their behavior and perception is altered, they're actually going to act different in society and actually alter society just ever so slightly. I'm actually thinking that some of that brain growth is almost like trying to regrow that brain aspect parts that got pruned off in that childhood stage where the brain gets pruned. And maybe the brain is pruned to the consensus, but maybe there are other realities that can be created if the brain didn't get pruned in that way. So what I'm saying is this mania is like energy coming up to try and get us to see the world differently, to be in the world differently, to act in the world differently, to have those manic traits, to have the manic state and actually start to embody those traits. And I realize it's not just about embodying the manic traits, but it's about making them relational. So if I sit at home and I embody all my manic traits, but I never go out and say hi to somebody, it's not going to make it relational. So people would see a person that, say, had practiced their manic traits, and that person would have a different energy than people that maybe wouldn't have had that state change. And I also realized that when I was talking about practicing manic traits, it's actually not practicing in order to get that back, because I actually feel like that state is our natural state. It's our adult child state. I'm not sure if I said this before, but it's like if I was a child and then I never got conditioned through education, through family, and all of that, and I was still in that innocent, curious, in a state of wonder and awe about the world, and feeling like I'm superhuman because I'm a child and I don't realize that I'm not yet. If I would have never been conditioned, that trajectory that I would have gone on throughout my life is the manic state adult. So that's the unconditioned adult child version of me that exists alongside of me, within me. And the only reason I'm not embodied as that version of me, as the true version, is because of the programming, is because of the hurts, because of the sadness, because of different things I've experienced in my life that cause me to have these memories and things that make me react in a way that make me want to protect my ego. So there's one thing to have a reflex reaction to want to protect the body from like a dangerous animal. It's another thing to try to protect the ego. And then the ego is trying to protect the ego. And so it's just strengthening the ego more and more over time. And because there's that cluster and that constellation of thoughts and memories and protection mechanisms, that actually prevents me from being my natural childlike adult self. And so the reason I said that is because it's not necessarily about practicing mania because I need to practice and it's going to take a lot of time to get back to that version of myself. It doesn't take time. I already saw that. I already saw, boom, snap of the fingers, I can be in that state of mania and I'm just that other version of myself. So why can't I just snap my fingers again and be there and not have to practice? The reason is because the ego. It's because I've practiced being that ego self. And so my thoughts on practicing the manic traits are it's going to write over some of that ego programming by embodying those manic traits that are actually relational and embodied traits. So the ego is just thoughts in one's head, and the traits are actually action. A lot of them are perception, action. So in a moment where I can be kind, I'm kind. If I can be conscious of my posture and be up straight in a proper posture, so gravity has the least effect on my physical structure, and it's not going to start hunching me over time, which eventually that causes more and more problems. Like gravity is one of the biggest things that causes health trouble over time, and or not walking properly. So, or being creative is a natural part of being in the manic state. And that's another thing I realized, is that the manic state is like the adult child state, and it goes along with this like brain growth pruning thing I was talking about too. And also in childhood we would have lots of thoughts and ideas and perceptions, and we wouldn't be filtering them. We wouldn't be filtering them based on right and wrong, because we don't really know right and wrong. And then a lot of times we'll ask our parents like, oh, is this right? And they'll say, no, that's not right. So we prune it away. We say, no, that's not right. So this is right, and this is how I should think about it. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that process per se, but it seems like it gets reignited again in mania. And if I'm an adult child version of myself, mania is very characteristic of creativity and learning. And this whole hyper associative thought process and new thoughts and new perceptions and new ideas, and so much of it is actually like a learning process. It's kind of like actually being able to learn again, and we're learning based on all this new information coming up and trying to make sense of it. So instead of going through this linear process of studying a subject, maybe specializing in something or learning about something in detail, which is also an important process, mania is sort of like learning about everything fresh again and wondering about it and being curious. And to me, this is actually important, because otherwise we're so stuck in the structures of thought that we think, that we know, that we think are the truth and are everything and all in our beliefs. And I think this energy of mania comes up and breaks that all apart. So there was stuff there about the learning. It's like definitely back to learning and creativity. The other thing was about the practicing. And again, some of the practicing is, it's not just writing over like the thought habit patterns, it's also writing over the patterns of the body. So to go around and actually smile at people, that is changing not just thoughts, it's changing like your face. Like, since I started smiling more, my teeth actually do show more. And when I smile, a lot of times my lip goes like this, whereas before when I smiled, it always went like this. So, what I'm saying is the structure of the face changes based on how we are and how we use our face. So going around smiling people not only changes our face for like the better, but it also is relational. So someone may or may not smile back. Sometimes when I get a smile from a stranger, it's the best moment of my day. It's like it's a surprise. It's nice. And I generally smile at people and people smile back or say hi, and it's just nice. And so that's the relational aspect. So it's embodying it in one's physiology, in one's body, and also relating it. And also by embodying it, we are relating it, because people notice when you have yourself, together, and your energy, and you're together to the point where you're not thinking about yourself and your woes. You're actually there, present, and ready to share a smile or ready to share a hello. And that's a gift, that's giving. And we're just being perceptive and not necessarily being stuck in one's head and noticing, oh, I could open the door for someone, and not hesitating, not thinking, oh, someone else might do it, just actually doing it without even thinking. And that's part of getting rid of some of the structures of thought, is just acting without thinking. Because there's a lot of action we can do that doesn't really require thought. If we're in a present moment situation, it doesn't generally require thought. And again, the practicing isn't to say like you need to practice in order to be that way. Somebody could get a whack on the head and be totally different tomorrow. So you don't necessarily have to practice. But the practicing, I feel, writes over not necessarily the thought habits in your head, which I think I already said, but it actually writes over the way that you use your body, the gestures, the way you move, the way you, everything. So it becomes embodied, and you become a different relational human being. And it's just a totally different way of being. So I feel like we can actually be more that way instantaneously. And even by practicing it, I don't even mean practicing it, it's more like noticing it. So just noticing it moment to moment, noticing the gesture that one is doing. Not necessarily thinking, okay, I'm practicing this, but by being conscious, being aware, and noticing, we'll notice that we naturally do it, versus if we're identified with our thinking process. And in that way, it's a moment-to-moment practice. It's not a practice in order to accumulate it. It's just each moment what is required, like see and act. And also, that way, if the ego structure does collapse again, all of those traits that one experiences as oneself in mania will already be in the muscle memory. It will already be in the gestures. So when that extra energy comes in, I'm thinking a person might not even really notice, because it's not like this extra energy coming through and it has nowhere to go. It can't be expressed. It can't be expressed through the body, through gesture. It can't be expressed through conversation. It can't be expressed through writing or sharing in some way. I feel like the more one embodies that sharing that they want to be, the less one will really notice that extra energy. It'll be like designed into one's life already. And I feel like that state, our natural state, is available to us right now. Yet at the same time, if I was in that natural state right now, that exact natural state, I wouldn't necessarily want to spend every day at home sitting on the couch talking to myself on a phone. I would be wanting to do different things. And what I'm saying with that is I need to start doing some of those different things. So again, when I am that self, I can go about those activities without getting lost in them. Like without it's almost part of that pruning thing, not just pruning in one's brain or pruning in one's thoughts or pruning in one's way they see the world, but also pruning in one's lifestyle design. So if I don't sort of have a plan of what I'm going to do with some of that manic energy that are things in line with what I've seen that I want to do before, then when the energy comes, I'll end up doing everything. And a lot of it will be unrelated to what it is that I'm trying to design my life as. Because my life has to be congruent with that energy, with that life energy, with that energy that I am in that state of mania. Because if it's not, and I am that exact version of me that I am in that state, and I have this same old setup, it's not going to work as well as if I have a design for that. So maybe sometimes I'm not in that state, and this life that I have right now, my routine is fine. But maybe I also have to have another routine in mind for when that happens. And part of that is making these videos a little bit, because I feel like if I can just share some of these things, then that's a way for the energy to almost like get out of my system. And because at some point, I don't really want to be sitting here talking about that. I want to be just living that way, and maybe living that way and talking about it. And I'm not sure if I'd even release these until I am, because I will have done a lot of talking, and it's all philosophizing, it's all words. It's one thing for me to say, I talk about like trees being cut down and homeless people and stuff while I sit in my cushy little place, right? That's not really embodying my altruism. But at the same time, part of my altruism with these videos is that I really feel like we have been given the shit end of the stick, and we've been told how to interpret ourselves through these experiences. And I'm not trying to say that they're wonderful experiences all the time. There's a lot of people suffering, and I've suffered a lot too. But at the same time, I think there's a lot more to it, and I could be completely wrong, but part of my altruism is just to put this out there and just talk about it, because if it does help a few people see things a little bit differently in terms of even reframing. Like, my reframe that I gave was, I take medication to stay grounded in this reality that is happening. I don't take it necessarily because I'm deficient or defective. It keeps me grounded in this reality. Otherwise, I kind of my consciousness changes and I go off into other experiences of reality that get me a bit lost. So that's a reframe. But then there's also revisioning, which to me it's not just about, oh, this is the new way to interpret it, one vision. It's, in my mind, 1,000 visions per person. And they're just stories and just talking. And I've said at the very least, some of them could just be interesting movie scripts. And it's really just entertaining ideas. And in the state of mania, we get a lot of ideas and we entertain them. Some of them we follow or we go off with a bit. And others are just entertaining. They're entertaining us. So some are entertaining, some we entertain. So it's just entertaining ideas. And that's what I'm doing, is entertaining ideas. They're interesting to me, some of them, and they could be entertaining, and it's not just also about, okay, these are my 1,000 visions and different ways I see it. It's about create some of your own ways of seeing it and thinking about it for yourself. And just those 3 distinct things that I just mentioned could create enough of an energetic shift for a person to not self-stigmatize so much, to actually think, well, maybe I'm not ill and deficient. Maybe that's the way society sees it, and that's the way it's interpreted right now. And maybe it's a useful framework to utilize because that's the one that's available. But it doesn't mean I have to think that and believe that about myself. And it doesn't mean that I have to go around saying, I'm not mentally ill, and fight the system. A lot of people do that, and that has its value, but to me, I wouldn't want to get better just to use my energy getting mad at the system that was there to help me, because it wasn't as helpful as it could have been if they had different perspectives of helping the situation, and they don't. And that's why I would like to speak about a million perspectives, because maybe that will help shift people to see that maybe there are different ways of thinking about it, and ways that we'd rather think about it than the illness thing. And it's not that there's no bad stuff. I'm not saying that. There is. But there's also a lot of stuff out there focusing on the bad stuff of it. So they're doing a great job of that. And a lot of it has a lot of positive stuff mixed in with the bad stuff. And it's helpful. But I personally would like to focus on all those things that I just said about revisioning, reframing, and whatever the other one was. And also talking about some of the good things that happen, the spiritual aspects, or the traits that we experience in those states. And that's the next level of it, besides the self-stigma, like lessening the self-stigma by thinking of it differently. And not just that, but starting to think for oneself, so actually feeling empowered to think, versus just thinking about how we're told to interpret it and then reacting to life based on how people treat us, based on how we're told to interpret it, which we don't even have to believe that and think that about ourselves in the first place. It's nice, even if it's helpful to have a diagnosis and have the medical paradigm. You know, the medical part can be 2% of life, and then adding in 98% wellness and revisioning and reframing. And not only that, but thinking about the actual process of mania and psychosis and whatever, altered states of consciousness. I don't want to use the medical terms as much going forward, because this isn't even about those medical terms. Like, I only use them because I was diagnosed, but really I don't really believe those so much. So I might believe those 1% as it pertains to the practical matters, but the rest of it I don't really believe. And I don't even believe all the things that I've said necessarily. I just am talking about them. I'm not going to believe every single thing that I say, and I don't have to only say things that I believe wholeheartedly. Like, that is, like, why do we have to believe anything? Even the things that we believe that we believe. But anyways, so the next level, and again, wanting to think more about the positive aspects, is again the traits and states of mania and what that could mean and how it could be used as transformation into one's best self, which I believe a person's best self is actually for part of the design of all of humanity. So how can we best be in service of humanity in a way? So this is a bit of service to humanity from me, because I feel like by putting this on video, I can just maybe decide to never talk about it again and just get on with actually acting physically. But this way, I can have more conversation with more people. So the positive things, the traits, the states, but again, being one's best self. And being one's best self to me is actually part of finding one's altruism or designing one's altruism. And I feel like a lot of people in mania connect with giving and sharing and serving and altruism and meaning and trying to really find that or connect with that. And I feel like it's almost like a dis-ease of meaning. So we become hyper meaningful and ascribing extra meaning to everything in those states. But it's like we're trying to put meaning on something to make life more meaningful. And really, to me, it's about stepping into embodying that altruism that we want to share as our best selves. I feel the state of mania is sort of like it's going from egocentricity and worrying about oneself to world centricity. And so I feel that's the transformation. Again, when the ego collapses, which is just the thought structure and conditioning, we become that childlike adult version of ourselves, which doesn't really have an ego, so it's not so concerned about itself. Even though some of it does, there is some self-concern part of it. I'm not talking about all of mania is good. I'm not saying that. I'm talking about some of the positive aspects of mania. There are some really negative aspects, for sure. But I'm wanting to key in onto the positive ones, because those ones are generally missed, because a person, when they are eventually treated, are usually treated because of the negative aspects of mania, or maybe it's turned into a depression or a psychosis or something. If with me, it's psychosis. So by the time I'm treated and sort of dulled out again, maybe the mania was a while ago, and so it's sort of lost in the mix. And I'm not talking about mania is so good, so I want to go back into the state of mania with all the good, bad, and everything in between. I'm saying I want to look at the positive stuff that I experienced as myself in those states and use that as part of some kind of information to transform my daily life. So if I really liked a certain aspect of being altruistic or generous, maybe I can incorporate that in my daily life when I'm not in the state of mania. And I feel like that will create that as an embodied and relational part of our being. And I think that some of those positive traits in mania are trying to spring up through somebody when they go into that state. And now by being that way in daily life, like picking some of those, then it's actually embodied, and maybe when the energy comes, it's not going to be so disruptive, because a lot of the things that it sort of created a person to be, like very abruptly, they're already that way because they've been that way in daily life. They've been utilizing that to inform their daily life. Now, when a person gets treated and everything is focused on getting rid of symptoms and not letting those things return, no mania return, no depression return, those elements that could actually be useful, those are lost. And I think that's a shame. And I feel too that if I was to connect with my altruism and what it is that I want to give, and I start giving it, that's also going to reduce my self-stigmatization, because I know I'm being a good person. So even though I was given a diagnosis of some kind, I'm still able to extend myself and help somebody else. I don't have to put myself into the place of complete victim. And that's empowering to not take that stance as much as I can. And then also, if I'm busy doing kind of altruistic, caring things, I'm not going to really feel stigmatized as much, because if I'm doing that, people are less apt to stigmatize me or even notice that anything's maybe a bit amiss with me. Or if I'm doing all those things and then I do have some kind of blip and I have a bit of a distress and things are not going so well for a little while, well, I've made friends through my kind acts and my altruism who are going to be more forgiving and who are going to be there for me, versus, connecting out of fear and stuff like that. And there was actually a quote in a study, and I've mentioned this before, that it says that the system going forward needs to be redesigned to actually have helping others as part of the system of care, if you want to call it that, which just means they're saying, like, a person has a crisis and they're like down and out, get them to help others right away. Because in the Happy Movie documentary, it talks about one of the fastest ways to feel happier and better about yourself and good is to do something for someone else less fortunate. And there's always somebody less fortunate. And that's, again, what I'm talking about with me just talking here. I'm not out doing as much for the less fortunate, like, say, the homeless people and stuff, which I do want to do, and I hope that you will join me. I have several initiatives in mind, and I haven't really talked about them. I will at some point. But again, this next level of finding manic traits and making them embodied. Again, it's not about the manic state, it's about the traits. And seeing that, hey, I was that way. We get brainwashed into this whole mental illness story that we forget, in the case of somebody that goes through a mania, that, hey, I experienced myself as a pretty good version of myself, and certain traits I had and experienced of myself I never knew I had, like I never knew. And then all the treatment happens and they disappear, but I feel they're still there. And also I feel like maybe by harvesting some of that, it can be used to design one's life going forward. That's the thing too, is that in a state of mania it feels like everything has to happen now. Well, I like to harvest all that and then see how I can create that in my life going forward. So all those ideas I had, just because I bottom out and end up dulled out and not able to really do much for a while, doesn't mean I don't have my little notepad of stuff that I thought about that I can go back to later and say, hey, that's cool, maybe I'll look into that. Oh, that's a silly idea, I don't want to do that. But it's there, and it can be a source for many years to come.